Hello everyone, this is SanadSK, and today I am back with a super interesting video where I'm going to be talking about the prototype DLC enemies and bosses. Now, if you don't know, in the files of Dark Souls 1 there are a couple of prototype enemies and bosses that are earlier versions of the same enemies found in the Artorias of the Abyss DLC. Now, a lot of people were debating whether these prototypes were in the game before the DLC was released or that they were added by mistake with the release of the DLC. So I wanted to clear up all of these misconceptions, and I took it to myself to actually recheck all these stuff in an unpatched version of the game and give you guys the clear picture of everything happening here. So in this video I'm going to be showing you the procedure I went through to check these things, and then show you all the prototype enemies rendered in full HD and comparing them with their final counterparts in a very clear and understandable manner to see how they have changed over time and what their significance in the development of the game was. So make sure you give this video a thumbs up and share it so that we can get rid of these baseless misconceptions. So without further ado, let us begin. So first of all, you have to know that the PC version of the game already has the DLC included with it, so any discoveries on the PC version cannot be used to explain things if you wanted to know if they existed before the DLC was released. So the perfect candidate for this is either the Xbox or PlayStation 3 version of the game. And I was able to get a non-patched version of the game without the DLCs or anything. It is the 1.00 version of the game, the very first version released for the game. So to be able to actually check the insides of the files, I would need to either jailbreak my PlayStation 3 and view the memory of it, which is a very big hassle, and I don't even have my PlayStation 3 anymore, or be able to run it on my PC, and that is where an amazing emulator called RPCS3 came to be very handy. Now, RPCS3 is a PS3 emulator, but it is still a very buggy and it's still in testing, and it's not effective for actually playing the games, but you can run Dark Souls on it, and I was able to get Cheat Engine to work with it and be able to read its memory. Even though the frame rate was ranging from 1 to 3 frames per second, but I was able to be patient enough to cope with it. So I first wanted to test changing memory values by trying unused weapons, and I spent like 2 hours trying to do that using the methods I use on the PC version, but sadly it didn't quite work. So I researched it a bit and I have found what the problem was. Now, I don't claim to be a professional programmer or anything, but I'm going to be explaining it as simple as possible and in the way that I understood it. So there's a thing called Big Endian and a thing called Little Endian. The memory of the PC version of the game is loaded in Little Endian, but the PS3 version is loaded in Big Endian. So what is the difference between them? So, for example, the model and icon IDs for the hard leather helm is 90, 24, 35, 04, but that is in Little Endian, which is the PC version. Now, the PS3 version shows and loads it differently. It loads it as 24, 90, 04, 35. So what it basically does is that it takes each 2 bytes and flips their positions, and that makes a huge difference while doing the swapping thing, because when converting it to decimal for the Little Endian version, it is 70,591,632, while in Big Endian it is 889,491,492. Same thing with the model ID. It is 9,360 in Little Endian and 36,900 in Big Endian. So it is just a big mess, but I got around it thankfully and was able to convert the Big Endian values back and forth and able to swap and use the things. So I was able to load the Black Zweihander weapon, which confirms that it was in-game before the DLC was released. I also tried the unused armor sets and they're also in-game. Now for the part that you were waiting for. So just a quick thing I have to let you guys understand. Now, each entity in the game has a unique ID for loading that entity, and by entity I mean enemy, boss or NPC. So for example, Gwyn the Lord of Cinder has the ID of C5370. Artorias has the ID of C4100, and you get the idea. That is for like all of the enemies and bosses in the game. So first I double checked that the DLC content doesn't exist in the files by checking the IDs of the DLC bosses, weapons and armors, and yes, they didn't exist in the original game. I even checked the armors if they were like, maybe their IDs were before the DLC was released and maybe they were replaced or something, but none of that existed in the files. So I began checking the prototype enemies, and much to my expectance, they actually exist in the files of the original game before the DLC was even announced and when the game was released for the very first time in the entire world. And they are Prototype Chester, Prototype Calamite, Prototype Sanctuary Guardian, and Prototype Chained Prisoner. So I'll be showcasing each one and comparing the different versions using fully rendered shots in 3ds Max. First, we are starting with Chester because I also promised to address the thing about his sword in my previous video. Now, the prototype Chester is 99% the same as the Chester we got in the DLC, with the exception of his model that his shoes look a little bit pointier. However, they share the exact same texture UVs, and when comparing their textures, they literally just reskinned him to look kind of rustier than he was originally. You can see the comparison on the screen. There is also the unused alternative version of him wielding the black Zweihander we talked about in the previous video, and it is also the same case as the Chester with the crossbow. The only difference is that this one is without the black coat that Chester wears. You can see on the screen the differences between them, and they are basically the exact same thing, but they kind of change the color palettes, you can say. Next we have is Black Dragon Calamite. In the prototype he was more of a grey dragon Calamite, and his body was more built as they have made him quite thinner in the DLC. The main differences are his hands and feet, as he originally had 5 fingers, where in the DLC he has 4. Also, the spikes coming out of his back originally had 1 row, but in the DLC he has 2 rows, and his wings are significantly smaller. The design of his head is also not changed much, as the idea of the third eye is still there. For me, I like to think of this as Calamite before the Abyss consumed him, as it would have made good sense in that aspect in my opinion. Next is the Sanctuary Guardian. Now, this boss prototype is actually the worst out of all of them because its texture UVs are very messed up, and that's why the hair looks pretty awful. The general shape of the prototype is very similar to its DLC counterpart, with the main idea of the chimera still the same. There are only slight differences such as the whiskers on his face, and his horns are a bit shorter than the prototype version, and the DLC version has a lot of more details, you can say, added on the prototype version. And the last one we have is the Chained Prisoner. This guy, same as Chester, shares the exact same textures, albeit they made it more mossy, you can say, and added a lot of detail to the textures. The main differences is that he originally had the spike ball in the back, and the huge log that has penetrated him didn't come out from the other side in the prototype. Here you can see the prototype with the textures of the DLC one. And here it is the DLC one with the textures of the prototype. Now, all of these enemies have fully working animations. Calamite has the idle flying animations, and he has them falling down, attacking, dying, and all of these. Chester has a full moveset of attacking, and even the crossbow version has the animations of him using the crossbow, and the sword version has a full moveset for him and kicking and all of that. The Sanctuary Guardian has also his attacks with the thunder, with the flying, with the attacking and dying, and the Chained Prisoner also has his attack and dying animations. So all of these things can mean a lot of things, but the most possible possibility, let's say, is that the DLC was supposed to be actually in the original game, but they ran out of time and they couldn't finish everything and make it playable at the time. And they decided that if they were gonna create a DLC, they can use these assets. Now, why am I saying this is because Demon's Souls had the North Hill Limit area with functional enemies and NPCs and all of that, and even though they didn't release a DLC, they're still on disc until now. So maybe because Dark Souls was a huge hit, they decided to create a DLC for the game even if it's after the game was released. So make sure you guys tell me in the comments down below what you think about this. So, this is it for this video. I hope your mind didn't explode with all the technical stuff I explained, but a lot of people actually ask me in the comments that would like to know how I test stuff, so this is also a treat for those people. So, make sure you like and share this video, and make sure you hit that subscribe button to see when I upload a new video, and make sure to click that bell icon to receive a notification when I upload a video. Also make sure to follow me on Twitter if you would like to see how I do things, and I release a couple of things here and there regarding my content and some other games, and my Twitter is at SanadisK YouTube. You can find it in the description or on the screen. So I'll be seeing you in the next video. Bye bye.